Yes, ma'am.
And if I might, Your Honor, for the record, have it reflect that I'm showing this counsel what's been marked for identification purposes as State's Exhibit 61.
You may.
And if I may approach
You
the
may.
witness. I'm going to ask you, Detective Thompson, to take a look at State's 61 and tell me if you recognize what that item is, sir.
Yes, this is a CD copy of the digital recording I made on the 19th of November.
How is it that you know that's a copy of the CD recording you made?
I have a dated initial to the top left-hand corner of the envelope, and the disc has information on it saying this is the Andrea Sneiderman interview for the November 19th.
Okay. And have you had an opportunity to review what is in State's Exhibit 61?
I have.
Does it fairly and accurately depict the interview/discussion that took place on November 19th, 2010?
Yes, it does.
Were there any alterations or deletions to that recording as you reviewed it?
No.
Your Honor, at this time, the State would tender into evidence State 61.
Any objection?
No, sir, none whatsoever.
Okay. So,
Are you gonna play that at some time?
we are, but
Okay. Are you gonna be at that? Go ahead.
during the interview, which is now recorded and documented in State 61,
Your Honor, I'm going to object about any questions about the interview. The interview has been tendered. It is the highest and best form of the evidence. Let's do the interview.
So the
I am
objection
objecting-
is,
Best evidence objection, yes, sir.
all right. I'm gonna overrule that objection. You may ask your question.
thank you, Judge. During the interview, did you get or did you ask for the information to help you in developing leads?
I did.
And were you given any names or ideas as it relates to who could potentially have been responsible for shooting and killing Rusty?
I was given many names.
And were you given, by whom were you given many names?
By whom?
Correct.
Andrea Sneiderman gave me a list of names
Okay.
throughout the entire discussion.
So the defendant gave you a list of names.
That's correct.
Did that list of names include Hemi Newman?
It did.
Now, tell us what information, if any, you asked about the names that were on that list.
During the entire discussion, we were mostly talking about Rusty's business dealings. We spoke about Discovery Point.
What was the service?
Discovery Point is a daycare franchise. We spoke about the owners of Discovery Point, how Rusty worked for them.
Do you remember the names of the owners?
I remember the last name was Clark,
Clark,
Mr. and Mrs. Clark.
Mr. and Mrs. Clark, okay.
We spoke about Star Voicemail, and
Star Voicemail.
Star Voicemail was an enterprise that Rusty and Neil Jagoda were trying to start up as their own business.
Jagoda
Jagoda.
is another name. Was that one of the names on the list?
That was one of the names on the list, and she also mentioned that name during the discussion at the hospital.
Okay.
We spoke about investors in the Star Voicemail. We spoke about her exterminator, how the exterminator knows the schedule of the family. He's there quite often. They're good friends. In fact, he called while we're doing this discussion at the house, and I spoke to him briefly on the phone, got his information, and followed up the phone call once I left the house.
Okay.
We spoke about a suspicious male that was beside the house, that was Rusty found laying down next to their gas line into the house.
When did that incident occur?
I don't
Relates to
remember.
the murder.
I don't remember the date, but it was prior to
Okay.
the murder by days. And she actually was emphasized that she thought that the person laying next to the gas line was an extremely important person that we need to look into.
Did she give you a name?
She didn't give us a name. She described what happened that day, that she had already left for work. Rusty came out.
And again, without telling us specifically everything that somebody else said, just try to listen to my question.
Yes, ma'am.
Did she give you the name of a person who was lying beside the house?
No name was given.
All right. Now, you told us that she gave you information that included Hemi Newman, Mr. and Mrs. Clark, Mr. Jagoda, the investors in Star Voicemail, an exterminator, and an individual that was lying beside the house
That's correct.
on a date prior to the shooting.
Correct.
Do you recall anyone else that may have been included on this list of people?
I don't recall anything.
Okay. Now, was this actually a physical list that was given, or a list of names that came out throughout the course of the discussion/interview?
During the course of the discussion.
All right. So, when you said the exterminator actually called, correct?
Correct.
When the exterminator called, has she given you that name already?
She did.
And tell me how much information you were able to get from the defendant about the exterminator.
Well, just that
How much information were you able to get?
enough to know that that's somebody I should probably talk to.
Okay. So the exterminator kind of went down on your list.
Correct.
Now, what about Mr. Jagoda? How much information were you able to get about Mr. Jagoda?
I actually spoke to Mr. Jagoda the day of the 18th. He came in to do an interview.
Did you call him in?
I called him in, and
All
he
right.
was
So you actually called Mr. Jagoda in the day before,
correct.
based on the information you had gotten at the hospital.
Correct.
And from the defendant, how much information were you able to get about Mr. Jagoda?
Enough to establish that what she was telling me was the same thing that he told me in the interview before, so I know that it was legitimate information.
Okay, so would you agree or disagree that the mention of Mr. Jagoda and information about him took how much time?
It was a decent amount of time. It was, I don't know exactly how much. It was more, it was, I want to say 15, 20 minutes talking about Star Voicemail, maybe a little bit longer. And Neil Jagoda was the primary partner with Rusty in this business venture.
And what about the conversation about the exterminator? How much time did that take?
It didn't take a lot of time, but it was she had enough detail about what the exterminator knew to make me think, well, that's somebody I have to include in my investigation. You know, she provided, like I've already stated, that he knew the schedule because he's there during the mornings to do the extermination. He knows when he can and can't be there because he knows when people are going to be at the house or not at the house, and he's been doing it long enough that they knew each other very well.
And this is all information you got from the defendant?
That's correct.
What about Mr. and Mrs. Clark? How much time did you all spend talking about Mr. and Mrs. Clark?
Spent a good part of the discussion about Discovery Point, how Rusty worked there, and they were a horrible couple to work for. They initially hired Rusty to possibly take over the franchise business for them because they didn't have any kids to take over, so we're looking for somebody to pass the torch off to, basically, because they wanted to retire from the business. And things weren't working out. They put a hidden camera that's hidden in a smoke detector in his office to spy on him, and how co-workers would come to him to voice their disgust with the Clarks, and Rusty was basically the relief valve for a lot of the employees at the main office.
So, and this, again, is all information that you're getting from the defendant about Mr. and Mrs. Clark.
That's correct.
Would you characterize it as being a significant amount of information? Or?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes, there was a significant amount of information.
And what about Mr. Newman? How much information were you able to get about him?
Not that much. Approximately an hour and 16 minutes into the interview, I specifically asked Andrea, the defendant, if anybody had attempted to break up their marriage or shown interest in her, and she said yes. Her boss, Hemi Newman.
Okay, so I'm going to stop you for a second, because you just told us an hour and 16 minutes into the interview/discussion, you asked her a specific question,
Yes, ma'am.
and it was at that time that you got the name Hemi Newman.
Correct.
So is it safe to say that this information was not volunteered?
That's correct.
What about the information about the other individuals? Did you have to ask specific questions to get that information, or did they give you that information freely?
It was given voluntarily.
And you told us about the individual that she mentioned that was lying next to the house
Correct.
days before, or I don't know, at some period before the shooting. Is that correct?
Yes.
Do you remember if it was days, weeks, months, years?
I don't recall. I'd have to look at the documentation for the date.
And while you may not recall the exact date, do you recall if it was close in time to the shooting or years before?
Within weeks.
Okay. And what information were you able to get about this individual?
Andrea told me that Rusty smelt a possible gas leak or smelt gas in the air. He went over to the side of the house where the gas line came into the house to see what was going on. He found a person laying down by the gas line. He confronted the person, asked him a couple of questions. The person stood up, looked at Rusty, and then ran away. And at that point, Rusty got into his car, pulled up in front of the house, and called the police.
Was a description of that individual given?
She called him a Mexican man, or a Mexican. Stated that when he ran, he couldn't have gone down one particular side of the house. It was a large gully down there, and if you went down there, you could seriously hurt yourself. So he had to have run in the other direction down to the end of the cul-de-sac. There's a path that goes into another neighborhood over there, and as he was running away...
I'm going to object. Who is it who's supposed to be? Is this Mrs. Sneiderman
I'm
saying
gonna-
what somebody else said?
Well, I'm going to sustain, yes, sir, I'm going to sustain that objection. I'm going to direct, if you would.
Yes, Judge, I will.
I'm just responding if there's an objection. That's sustainable.
Yes, I will.
All right.
And remember, listen to my questions and answer
Yes,
my
ma'am.
questions only, okay? You had a description. I think you said she called him the Mexican man. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Your Honor, with permission, I would ask the court to play a clip, but what has been identified as, I'm sorry, can I just get the number?
You may. All right, ladies and gentlemen, before that clip is played, we're going to go ahead and give you your break at this point in time. So cue it up, well, not cue it up, just put it in that location on where you're going to be. But ladies and gentlemen, when I give you this break, you're going to be breaking for lunch at this point in time. Do not discuss the case. I allow anyone to discuss the case with you. You can leave your notepads there in the jury room, turn them face down. No one's going to look at your notes. And if you need additional notepads, let Deputy Garrett know, and he'll get you additional notepads and additional pencils. But do not remain upon the floor when I release you. Do not interact with anyone you should not interact with, as I told you earlier in the week, and I will tell you every day during this week. Do not sit next to anyone who may be discussing the case or allow anyone to sit next to you during the lunchtime. Even if you collectively go to lunch together or individually, do not discuss the case when you're at lunch. Do not read or look at any media coverage pertaining to this case. Do not go upon the internet and do any research about this case. Do not blog about this case while it's ongoing. Do not go to any location that may or may not have been made reference to. All the evidence will come to you in the form of sworn testimony and any physical evidence that's introduced during the course of the trial. You're more than welcome to bring something to snack. You're not able for you during the afternoon break. Do not consume any alcoholic beverages during lunch. Deputy Garrett will turn back over to your cell phones and communication devices, but when you come back from lunch, just put them in the off position so that they will not be vibrating during the afternoon session. The lawyers and parties cannot talk or interact with you, so I don't ever want you to think they're being rude or discourteous. Deputy Garrett, we're going to be on recess until 1:30.
All rise. Into the world that is table.
Where are you?
I don't eat lunch. I generally like a latte. That's about it. I use lattes. I don't eat one meal a day for the most part.
Jeffrey, okay, get away from me. Don't talk to me about that. I believe in eating all day long.
You know what? You're lucky. You've been blessed to have.
No. I eat 3 cups of fruit every morning. I follow a mostly vegetarian
diet.
diet.
My wife is under 100 pounds. She eats like a hog.
Oh, I don't. I can't. I gain weight like that.
Yeah, I can't do it.
But I eat tons of fruits and vegetables.
I don't eat white sugar, white flour. But I do. I have sort of an allergy to dairy, so I drink lattes. It stunts my appetite. It deadens. It numbs my appetite.
All right, enjoy
It's a
your big
system
old
I
fat
have.
latte.
It's a system I have.
Very emotional morning.
Highly effective.
Hey,
you got
Yeah, I do.
I need to take my
She saw
phone.
for a good while an undercover detective testified about the morning of Russ.